Folks, welcome again to the Most Important Skill in Life podcast. I believe this is episode 3 of the podcast. And today we're going to talk about the second principle from my book, Adapt and Overcome, 3 Principles to Master the Most Important Skill in Life, which is personal ownership. Personal ownership principle number 2 is understand your story. And today, folks, this episode is going to be about taking responsibility, taking ownership of our belief system. And so just to define a little bit more for us what I mean by understanding your story, the phrase I like to think about here in this principle is, remember in the last episode 2, principle 2, we talked about taking responsibility for our actions. Primarily, how do we thinking about continuing to move forward in the face of adversity, continuing to take action when we meet friction, when we hit roadblocks, because consistent action for a long period of time is usually what produces positive change in our lives. But what drives our actions? Well, our actions are driven by our beliefs or come from our beliefs, even when we don't fully understand what we believe in. So remember that our actions come from our beliefs, even when we don't know what we believe in. Now, something that I think is very easy to get confusing with my philosophy here, this personal ownership, this idea of personal ownership being the most important skill in life. And again, personal ownership is taking responsibility for our actions, beliefs, and direction in life. So the 3 principles correlate to each one of those things. Talked about actions. Today we're talking about beliefs. Next time we'll talk about direction. So our actions come from our beliefs even when we don't know what we believe in. Something people mistake with me all the time and mistakenly take away from that first principle all the time is that I'm saying never quit or never give up on things. And I just think that's not correct at all. I think had you talked to me when I was like 18 years old and I had just lost all that weight, I might have said to you, part of the secret in life or part of getting what you want in life is never giving up. Because at that time where weight loss was concerned, I just didn't give up. But the problem with that by itself is, sometimes we are moving down a road where we've become convinced in our head that we need to do this. And we haven't stopped to assess the fundamental beliefs behind moving down that road. So when I talk about understanding your story in this second principle, what do I mean by story? A story is simply facts tied together through assumptions into a coherent narrative about how the world works. All human beings tell stories. Stories help us encapsulate factual information into a narrative that's easier to remember. It's hard to remember isolated facts by themselves, but when you put it into a story form, it's easier to remember those pieces of information. And I think this is why psychologically we do this. Stories also help us make sense of things. Remember, when I was growing up and getting bullied because I was obese and, going through abuse, whatever, part of the story I told myself was that the factual things that I'm experiencing every day and the fact of my mood and the lacking in self-confidence, the fact that I'm overweight, I told myself that what these things are, what they mean, and this is what a big thing that stories help us do is they help us give meaning to situations, is I told myself the story that these painful things in the present at that time, in my childhood, these painful things in the present will make me stronger of character, tougher of character for some future obstacle or some future mountain that I will have to climb. And of course, for me, this turned out to be very true. And we'll see some of that come to fruition here today. But so again, real simple, facts tied together through assumptions. Now, when I say assumptions, that's another word for ideas, philosophies, perspectives, or beliefs. And there's some other words that I use in the article that's tied to this. But it's basically how we think about things and how we interpret things, our perspective on life, our philosophy about certain things, the ideas that we have about certain things. The problem, though, with these beliefs or ideas, etc., or these assumptions is just that they are assumptions. And assumptions or beliefs can be wrong sometimes. And in particular, when we think about the population of the earth being over 7 billion people, and my theory is that every single one of us has a story. And so to further complicate this issue is we all make assumptions that we aren't aware of. And so then when you bring everybody together, living life and interpreting life with these assumptions that sometimes we aren't aware of, and I include myself in that, then inevitably there are going to be gaps in our understanding about things, and situations are going to pop up that kind of challenge our fundamental belief system about how life in the world works. And when these times come up, it can be very disorienting. And so what I'm going to go over here today is really where I first learned how to quit, how to let something go. So remember, I'm never going to tell you to never give up on things. The question is what you have to analyze is, why is something meaningful to me? Because remember, that's the phrase that I use in the first principle, action over time. If it's worth having, if it's meaningful to you, then it is worth fighting for. It is worth continuing to press on. But this is not to be interpreted as never quit, because what if you realize one day that something isn't meaningful to you anymore? That job isn't meaningful to you anymore. This marriage staying in it isn't meaningful to you anymore, et cetera, et cetera. You have to determine that. Remember, this is taking responsibility for your beliefs, your actions, your direction in life. And so when this idea of story first became present to me when I graduated college. I graduated from the University of Houston in 2005 with a degree in electrical engineering, and I graduated with honors. I was a first generation college student, first in my family to ever finish college. And in particular, I finished college in 2005, and I got a job offer with Shell Oil Company there in Houston, Texas. And I started in August of 2005 working there. My starting salary was $60,000 a year. And if you can imagine being from an African American family from the Deep South, everybody, my family, my friends, everybody around me was so proud of me and thought I had really, really achieved the American dream. I was 23 years old at the time, and everybody just really was so proud of me and so happy for me. But I remember the feeling that I had when I graduated and when I was getting close to graduation was really it wasn't of celebration. It was more of relief. I was just relieved that college was over with. I worked really hard academically in school. Obviously, electrical engineering is a challenging degree pathway. But I think even more than the degree being challenging in and of itself, I think the reason I had to work so hard academically, and this just wasn't in college, this was also in high school, middle school as well. During my entire K through 12 education, not the whole time, but probably from about second or third grade on, I really applied myself aggressively academically. I would say I worked just as hard academically as I did on losing weight. And so I was really aggressive about academics all the way through graduating high school and then through graduating college. But the whole time I was never really that interested in anything that I was studying. And we'll get more into why I was pushing myself so hard. But all that to say, I was working so hard, and I was just relieved that it was all over with once I got done with college. I was exhausted, and I was so tired of force feeding myself information academically. But when I started working in August of was it August or it might have been July of 2005, one of the two. I still remember, and I write about this in my book, I still remember walking up to the Shell building in West Houston on the first day of work. And I remember thinking in my head very clearly, we'll never forget this, I am going to hate this. That is the phrase that kept running through my mind as I still remember sitting in that first meeting there that day and meeting everybody and just walking through the office and just thinking to myself, this is gonna drive me insane. I'm gonna hate this. And I was 100% right. long story short, you have to buy the book to read the whole story. But eventually I end up, after about like 8 or 9 months on a job, I started to have fantasies while I was driving to work. I lived more kind of towards the center of Houston, and I drove out to West Houston when it was time to go to work. And I started to have fantasies of driving off an overpass on the interstate when I would be driving to work. And I also eventually started having mild panic attacks every morning before work. On a weekend, they would go away when I was off. But when it was time to go to work, I would start having these panic attacks. And it was crazy to me because as sad as I had been growing up at different times when I was growing up as a kid, I never thought about taking my own life. And for the first time in my life, I was 23 years old, I was starting to contemplate taking my own life. And that was when I decided to go ahead and quit. When after about probably like two to 4 weeks of just having these fantasies and having those panic attacks, I was like, man, I'm done with engineering. I'm through with this. This is making me miserable. And so I walked away. And I decided to try personal training right after quitting corporate America and quitting that job. But the problem is while I was at the job in that 11-month period that I worked as an engineer, I got a new car loan. Obviously, I had my student loan debt, and I had a couple other debts that I needed to pay off. And of course, jumping right into personal training, I couldn't match the income right away that I was going to have, that I had as an engineer. There was no way I was going to make $60,000 a year in, having started personal training 3 months, prior, or whatever the case may be. And so pretty quickly, I began to run into a lot of financial trouble. And eventually my car got repossessed. My credit cards went into default. My student loans went into deferment. And eventually I found myself being evicted from my apartment for failure to pay rent. And also the power had been turned off in my apartment because I hadn't paid the electricity bill either. And so eventually I'm still working. I was working at a 24-hour fitness that was nearby. And I would go to work during the day and then I would come home. This is probably a year or so after I had quit working for Shell as an engineer. And I would go to 24-hour fitness during the day. And then I would come home at night to this dark, empty apartment. And I would sit there and just kind of think about what had gotten me to that point. Because, a year prior, I was at the apex of what the American dream looked like. And I was the epitome of success to all the people around me. But now that I was being evicted and all this financial trouble and I was a personal trainer, during that time period, a lot of the people that felt that I had been so successful, I would say some of them scoffed at me, and we're talking about family, friends at the time. Some of them thought I was extremely foolish and stupid for making the decision to walk away from engineering. People felt like I wasn't paying my dues, and people just felt like, Travis, do you not understand how many people would be so grateful to have that engineering job that you had? Et cetera, et cetera. People just felt like people could not fathom walking away from that kind of money after putting that kind of energy and effort into getting that degree and then allowing myself to tumble into this financial turmoil. But here's the irony. And look, I want to be very clear here. I'm probably like 24 at the time. I'm being evicted from this apartment, car repossessed. I'm like $60,000 in debt. I go from making $60,000 a year as an engineer to now I'm $60,000 in debt. And I have no job and like a trickle of an income as a personal trainer. Something has to happen, but I don't know what. But here's what was very interesting to me and what I began to contemplate in this dark apartment is I was actually happier during that time period. I'm walking to the gym every day. I'm broke as a joke. Like I'm embarrassed when I see classmates from college out and about in town because I know I don't have any money and I know I've quote unquote fallen from grace because I quit this job. But man, like I was happier. When I was depressed as an engineer, I gained like 30 to 40 pounds. like I said, panic attacks every day. My knees and my back were starting to hurt every day. And of course, I'm starting to have these fantasies of taking my own life. But once I cut loose from that environment and went into that gym environment as a personal trainer, I mean, the weight melted off. My body started to feel good again. I could sleep at night. I was having insomnia when I was an engineer. I could sleep at night again. Like the depression was, the difference in mood was so incredibly stark to me. This is what was so profound to me, because I was like, man, I'm infinitely happier working at a gym with way less money. I have hardly any material possessions. I'm getting calls from creditors every day. Like, there's a stressful component during this time, but I recognize that in terms of my resilience to get up every day and do the work to be a personal trainer, like, I could see myself doing that in the long term. Now, financially, I couldn't sustain it because of the debt and the indebtedness that I was in. And so what I found myself thinking about was, you know, so let me say it like this. What I found myself thinking about while I was in that apartment was the irony of, here I am flat broke, being evicted, and I'm in all this debt, but I'm happier than I've ever been in my entire life, versus when I was an engineer and at the epitome of success and making 60 grand a year, I was like so miserable that I was thinking about taking my own life, or daydreaming about taking my own life. I never really got serious about it, but to have daydreams about it is pretty damn serious in my opinion. And I was trying to figure out, like, how did I go to this, from this apex of success where everybody's celebrating me, to now everybody thinks I'm a fool, thinks I'm lazy, et cetera, et cetera. And I have no money and I'm being evicted and I can't pay my bills, but I'm happy. Like, it was such a weird dichotomy. And what the other thing that made it challenging for me was when I would talk to family and friends after, now that I'm being evicted, I'm struggling financially. When I would talk to people close to me and talk through the reality of my situation, I would get a lot of, like, I told you so. I told you you were stupid. I told you you were foolish for leaving that engineering job. I told you you were making the worst mistake of my life. And so eventually what I had to do was I began to stop calling people, and I began to isolate myself from friends and family, because I needed the space to not have my emotions manipulated by the situation and people's sort of insistence that the high income, good job, corporate America version of me was actually not only the better version, but the only version that they were willing to allow to exist. And so now that I'm trying to move in a different direction with my life as a personal trainer, fitness guy, whatever, people are using my financial situation to beat me over the head and belittle me. Sometimes it felt like being a little kid again and getting bullied again. So eventually I stopped answering the phone. I stopped calling people on my cell phone, even my parents to some extent. And what I began to do is I would come home from the gym, especially once the power got cut off in the apartment. And I would sit in that dark apartment and I would just think. And I would at the time I was a religious person. I would pray, but mainly I would think, and I had a notepad where I would write things down and try to figure out, like, how did I get in this position? And this is where the idea of the origins of our stories started to come to mind. And the origin of our stories have three origins. There's the close relationships that we have. There is society and kind of broader cultural influences. And then there's us. And so the first thing I thought about were, like, my close relationships. And remember, nobody around me agreed with my decision to leave engineering. But the main person I thought about when I thought about close relationships was my mother. Because when I was growing up, my mother would constantly tell my sister and I that we were poor. We were poor. And if you remember from the last episode, I talked about my mother recovering from trauma. She was a single mom. My sister's father wasn't in the picture. He had been physically and psychologically abusive. My father wasn't in the picture. He was just absent. And so she was a single mom struggling financially and recovering from past abuses, trauma, and, probably, feelings of abandonment where men were concerned. And so I think, her struggling to pay bills and take care of my sister and I, it sort of exacerbated this feeling of poverty and a lack of economic mobility, right? And so it's not just the fact that she doesn't have a lot of money, it's also the fact that she's has gone through this traumatic life to get to that point. And so she constantly communicated to my sister and I that we're poor. And if you don't want to be poor, you need to go to school, make good grades, and you need to go to college, get a good degree so you can get a good job so you don't have to be poor like we are right now. And she just drilled that into our heads when we were young. And so in a lot of ways, I think my aggressiveness with my academics was more about sort of a fear response because I didn't want to be poor. And poor sounded like the worst thing in the world when my mother would talk about it. But here's the irony that I point to in the article. When I was growing up, we never missed a meal. We never went homeless. That I can recall, maybe one time the lights got turned off and we went and stayed at a friend's place for like a few days, and then we went back to the house. Like we always had what we needed, and never did we get evicted from the apartment. And the irony in that is, never did we get evicted, and I was miserable when I was a little kid growing up. Here I was, fast forward in 2006 or 7, I'm being evicted from my apartment. I'm in a rough financial situation, but I was happier than I'd ever been. So what am I pointing out there? A big part of what we have to deal with when it comes to our story is remember, a lot of times I talk about the emotional blinders that various situations put over our eyes. And part of what I'm trying to do with these principles is help you see through your emotions. And so when I'm sitting in that dark apartment being evicted, part of what I realize is the emotion of fear and the fear of poverty had driven this aggressive action academically. Now, there's a lot of positives that came out of the rigor that I would put myself through academically. I mean, because I got an engineering degree, I'm not afraid to learn anything. When I went to the military and went through the Special Forces medical sergeant course, we're learning tons of stuff about medicine, pharmacology. We're learning about, I delivered a baby while I was in the military. I helped participate in surgeries with orthopedic surgeons, et cetera, et cetera. I did so many complex things. And I was not at all intimidated to learn those things because I had learned electrical engineering. And as complex as that was, I know I can learn something else. And so I'm not saying that there wasn't value in pushing myself hard academically. But the problem is because I'm kind of running away from what I'm afraid of, I'm not really analyzing whether or not I'm even interested in the material that I'm learning. And one of the big things that I reasoned when I was leaving engineering was that when people were encouraging me to stay at that job, the thing I kept saying to myself was, there's never going to come a point where I like what I'm doing here. This is oil and gas. It's not even electrical engineering. And even if it was electrical engineering, like I said, I was relieved to graduate. I was relieved that it was all over because I just wasn't really that interested. What I was interested in was health and fitness. And what I had reasoned was, I'm never going to push myself in this realm. I'm never going to push myself hard to go up higher. I didn't want to be a manager or anything. It wouldn't have mattered. I didn't see myself having I didn't see the intrinsic interest that would then fuel me pushing myself to drive my career in a positive direction. I was just surviving every day. That's all I was doing. And so to me, I didn't want to live like that. So that was a big part of why I walked away. And so we have to be careful because stories can sometimes encapsulate us in fear. And that fear can blind us to the reality of ourselves. And so because I'm chasing this, I'm really running away from the fear of poverty. I'm not even analyzing, well, what is poor and what makes a person poor? Because like I said, we never got evicted when I was growing up. My mom used to tell us we were poor all the time. here I am being evicted. I didn't necessarily feel poor. I was just like, I just need to make enough money to be able to survive. And turns out, like, I didn't have any material possessions really. My apartment was empty. I didn't even have any furniture. I didn't have a car. And I didn't care. Like, it didn't bother me at all. I was happy. Why? Why was I happy? Because I was spending the majority of my day in an environment that I wanted to be in, that I was interested in the gym. And so first place our stories come from is we're probably unconsciously adopting narratives from the people closest to us all the time, the friends that we spend a lot of time with, our parents in childhood, or our caregivers in childhood. That's a big place to think about. And you may be somebody, maybe you were in the foster care system, you bumped around a lot, and you got to think about how that influenced your narrative about the world and how life works. And like I said, again, for me, and this is just one specific story, there are lots of things that I could spend a lot of time going over and are probably worth a future podcast. But like just the narratives I adopted from family, the friends, the people I spent a lot of, the close relationships I had. And my mother was a primary one. And so I began to think about that when I was sitting in that dark apartment of like, oh, wait a minute. Like I adopted my mother's version of what a good life is, which was getting a degree and getting a good job. Now, the second origin of our stories has to do with society and broader cultural narratives, right? And so for me, when I was sitting in that apartment, I thought about going to school on a regular basis. And back when I was in school, I was in in high school, particularly, I was in what was known as a college prep school. So their whole focus was getting kids to graduate high school and getting them sent off to college. And so nobody ever talked about the trades or police or the fire department, certainly not being a personal trainer, which is what I was primarily interested in at this time. Nobody talked about any of these as alternatives or different pathways to life. And in the media in the 90s, going to college kind of was presented as sort of this key to a successful future. Like if you were going to college, it was like a golden ticket to economic mobility, which, in a lot of ways it probably is. But again, there are a lot of assumptions in there that I think are similar to my mom's narrative. Like, what is economic mobility? How much money is required to live a materially comfortable life? How far can a person go if they pursue a degree path that they're not intrinsically interested in? Again, that's the barrier that I ran into with engineering. When I graduated college, the original intention had been to go to grad school and get a PhD, et cetera, et cetera. But by the time I got done with my undergrad degree, I was sick of force feeding myself information that I didn't give a damn about. And I didn't care. I just didn't care about electrical engineering. I pushed myself hard. I did well, but I had run out of gas by the time I got to college. And so when I got to the corporate environment and it was just more of the same, like now we're learning about the oil and gas field. And look, I'm grateful for electrical engineers. I'm grateful for oil and gas, all that stuff. I don't care about that stuff, just like a lot of people don't care about exercise. A lot of people in those environments don't care about exercise physiology and the musculoskeletal system. I am profoundly interested in these things. So doesn't it make more sense in terms of thinking about longevity and career and the ability to push myself higher in my career to pursue something that I'm actually interested in? But when I was in school, and like I said, college prep, you got to remember, was I interested in personal training and interested in athletics? Yes, but I was over 300 pounds at my heaviest, and I wasn't an athletic kid. So I just kind of assumed that nobody would take those interests seriously. Add to that, I had prowess in science and mathematics. And so when I told teachers or guidance counselors that, hey, I'm interested in going and being an engineer in school, people celebrated me for that. And that made me feel like I was on the right path. And so again, it's this sort of, what I kind of gathered from my mother's narrative about us being poor was that I needed to run away from poverty, and a college degree and a good job was the way to get away from poverty. And then sort of the school college prep environment supported that narrative One, because it didn't present other pathways seriously, like the trades or fire, police, etc. And two, because people often celebrated me for my academic performance. So I just assumed as a kid, I'm going the right direction, right? It never dawned on me to stop and scrutinize those underlying beliefs. So again, second place our stories come from, the social narratives that we have to contend with, the American dream, right? Like I had climbed, after finishing my undergrad degree, I had gotten this job as an engineer. I was living the American dream, and that's something that people really celebrate. Ooh, Travis, you've got the good job. You've got the thing that everybody wants. You've got an engineering degree. You're a success, right? There's lots of people that have that fixed in their head. But for me, what was happening to me was I chased the American dream, and here I am depressed and suicidal. And so this isn't working for me. This is destroying me. So I had to go a different way. Now, the final place that our stories come from is the self. Okay. And what I thought about as I was thinking through my mom's stories and the close relationships that I had, and then as I was thinking about society and sort of the education system and the American dream narrative, I really began to get angry. There was probably, I always say it was probably like a 24-hour period where I was just kind of like pissed. And why was I so angry? Well, I had done everything right. I had done all the things that I was supposed to do. I worked hard in school, made good grades, went off to college, worked super hard, sacrificed social life, did all the right things, got the good degree, got the good job, and all it landed me was miserable, depressed out of my mind, having daydreams about taking my own life. And then because I wanted to save my own life and save my health and mental well-being, then I end up $60,000 of debt, being evicted from my apartment, and I'm embarrassed because I look like a failure to everybody. And I remember just being so angry for a brief period of time. And then a familiar phrase entered my head: Travis, ain't nobody coming to save you. And if you remember from the last episode, this was the same phrase that went through my head when I was 10 years old, and I decided that I was ready to start making some serious effort to try to lose weight. It was in this moment, in that dark apartment, I just realized that, Travis, even if people maliciously told you lies about the path you should walk in life, I chose to believe in it. Nobody held a gun to my head and made me take out student loans for college. Nobody held a gun to my head and made me take out an auto loan on a brand new 5-year car loan. Like, nobody made me do these things. These were all my choices. And it was my choice to put so much energy and effort into academics and particularly into engineering without scrutinizing why I was doing it. I could have made the choice to switch over to exercise science or some other degree, and I thought about it a whole bunch of times, but I never did. And the reason why I didn't shift gears is, and again, the self. Being bullied and picked on so much, one of the things that I craved from people was approval. I wanted to be accepted. I wanted to feel like people appreciated who I was as a person. And the only thing that I ever got any celebration for growing up was my academic prowess. Even though I was very interested in athletics and athletic performance and and strength and conditioning and the musculoskeletal system, because I wasn't athletic and because of my appearance, I always assumed that nobody would ever take those interests serious. And so I never brought them up. But when I said I wanted to major in engineering and when I made good grades in school, people saw that, and for brief periods of time, they would treat me with more respect because they felt like I was smart and I was going to be successful, etc. And I think a lot of why I pursued academics so hard is because I wanted that validation from people. And again, here is our emotions, my emotions in this case, blinding me to reality and blinding me to the course of action that I'm taking. I hated school the whole time I was in school. But I pushed myself so hard because I wanted that validation so much. But chasing the validation of other people, this is the major thing I realized in that apartment. Chasing the validation of other people got me depressed and damn near suicidal. And so in that apartment, I took ownership, right? I had to take ownership of my situation. And I had to look at the facts. I had to start separating facts from fiction, because remember, I'm still getting calls from creditors and debt collectors. I'm still $60,000 in debt. Like, it's a rough situation, y'all. It's scary because I'm like 24 years old. I know I can't go back to engineering because engineering made me absolutely miserable. And I even write in the book, there was a brief period, about 3 weeks, where I did go work as an engineer for another company because I was still listening to all those people telling me how foolish I was to leave, etc. And then after about 3 weeks, I quit again because the panic attacks started to come back. And I just said to myself, why am I doing this to myself? Why am I killing myself chasing this thing that I hate, right? And so what I had to do is, one, I isolated myself from people. Remember, I told you I stopped talking to people on the phone, and I just sat in that dark apartment every night, and I started to strategize, what do I need to do to get out of this situation? And the first thing I asked myself was, well, like, what do you want, and why was engineering so miserable? And it was real simple. I wanted a physically challenging job and a mentally challenging job. Engineering made me miserable primarily, like, when I think, one, I wasn't interested in the content of it. But two, going to that office environment and being in a little, it wasn't even a cubicle, y'all. We had these little, it was almost like an 8x8 jail cell. We had these, and they had these like gray walls, and you had that, that fluorescent lighting, and initially I was on the inside of the building, so I didn't have window exposure. I wasn't getting any sunlight into my office, and so I'd go in this little 8x8 office and with this just drab feel to it. And I mean, it was just miserable. I hated sitting at the desk all day, emails, and trying to get vendors on the phone. Like, it was terrible, man. Like, I look back at it, it was just like, it's a terrible, terrible pathway for Travis Daigle. And so I was like, man, okay. So we need to look at what's going to give us a physical challenge, mental challenge, sense of purpose, and what doesn't involve being stuck at a desk or going to an office every day. So that was one of the first things that was one of the first truthful observations I had about myself and about the world around me as I'm trying to reorient myself. But of course, like, the fears and the anxiety around, like, man, I'm $60,000 in debt and I'm being evicted from my apartment, car repossession, et cetera, et cetera. I'm fearful because, the voices are haunting me. You're a fool. You're making the worst decision of your life. You're so ungrateful. You're being so irresponsible. And what I had to do in this moment, and this is why the first principle is so important, this is why you must learn perseverance and persistence, because part of what having the experience of my childhood and overcoming obesity, part of what it helped me do in this situation where I've quote unquote fallen from grace and made the worst mistakes of my life was I was able to observe two things. One, I said to myself, and I remember saying this to myself in the apartment, I says, man, I lost 100 pounds with no help or guidance from any professional, no surgeries, no drugs, no personal trainers, no fit role models in my family or among my friend group. I didn't have any friends. And I made the most of the effort was done during a 7-year period where I was going to school every day, getting picked on and bullied every day for being obese in the first place. And I still lost 100 pounds and managed to keep it off. And, I'm 23 at the time. And I said this to myself. And what I also said to myself is, most people spend their whole lives trying to figure out how to lose weight, and they never do it. I did it before I was 18 years old. Okay? So I said that to myself. At this point, this is a factual thing that has happened. The other thing I said to myself was this. I pushed myself hard academically, K through 12 and college, and I earned a degree in electrical engineering with honors when I hated school. I absolutely hated school. This was another fact that could not be denied, right? These were These were facts that I'm separating the fact, the fiction and the opinion in the environment, in the stories of people is you're lazy, you're ungrateful, you've made the worst mistake of your life. And what I'm using these two realities to point out to myself is this. Like, I'm tough. Remember from the last principle, I had the confidence that I could do hard things. That was the main confidence. Even though I couldn't articulate it in words when it happened, when I lost all that weight, I think this situation, in this eviction, in this post-corporate America destruction of my life, what I'm realizing is I just need to put my life back together. This isn't, I've been through tougher, more difficult problems. This isn't that big of a deal. I just had to pay off debt, right? So I had to go find a job that I didn't hate, which in the article I write, that's a pretty low bar to meet. I've done harder things. I battled abuse, physical and sexual abuse growing up, then being bullied my whole K through 12 experience. I let all that crush me. So I just said to myself, why am I listening to these people? Because here's the other big thing that I started to realize. And this is where my self-confidence is starting to grow for the first time. And I needed that isolation to see this in myself. But at the time, there was nobody in my life close to me that could claim the same accomplishments. Like, did I know other engineers? Yes. But I don't think I even knew anybody else that had been through the physical transformation that I had gone through on my own with zero help from other people, from drugs, surgeries, etc. Like, and then overcoming the bullying, the abuse. Like, I didn't know anybody else that could claim both of those things. Maybe one, but not both. And so I've got all these people telling me that I'm lazy and ungrateful. And I'm like, and I didn't say this to them at the time, but in that apartment, I just remember saying to myself and like imagining those people, because, you know, my parents were in that group, friends were in that group, old co-workers were in that group. And I just would imagine myself saying to them, none of you can claim the difficulty of accomplishment that I had. Like, I have done hard things. Getting out of debt was just math. Like I said, I just needed a job that I didn't hate, which is a pretty damn low bar to meet. And so during this time, I'm realizing like, okay, Travis, you know, let's start putting together a plan for the future. And what I talk about in the article is what I'm doing by separating, by looking at the facts of the situation. I'm asking myself honestly, what do I want? What do I actually want to do? Because I'm probably going to be able to get more energy out of myself by pursuing something that I want to do. And then I'm asking myself, historically, what have I done? And so when the anxiety and the fear around my financial situation, when that would creep into my head and start to kind of scramble my thoughts, I would just focus on the fact that, wait, calm down, Travis. You've done hard things before. And this is why I need you all this is why I talk about working out so much. Because when you work out every day, what you're doing is you're voluntarily choosing difficulty, and then you're overcoming that difficulty. And the more you see yourself able to do that, the more confident you are when you encounter the unknown difficult challenges that inevitably pop up in everybody's life. And that's all I was doing. I was using the difficult circumstances that I had already overcome and the difficult accomplishments and goals that I had already reached. I was using them as reference points to overcome these stories and opinions that people were lobbing at me from all different directions and telling me how much of a fool and how stupid I was and how lazy I was. The lazy one was the one that used to bother me the most because I was always seeking other people's approval. And I had always been heralded as this very responsible and conscientious person. So when people started calling me lazy, it would really break my heart. But I realized that's because I felt like I needed their approval in order to live my life the way I thought I should live it. The other thing that would bother me about the whole lazy thing is, y'all, I got a degree in electrical engineering and I lost 100 pounds with no help. Like, what do you mean lazy? Like, what are you talking about? That doesn't even make any sense, right? But I didn't have the confidence quite yet to say it that explicitly. I do today. people know better than to say those kinds of things to me today. Because one, I don't care. And two, like, to some degree, I might not mind hurting your feelings about where your life is and what you've done. But again, that's another podcast. But part of that first principle, action over time, and learning that resilience and learning that persistence, is developing the ability and the data points to refute people's foolishness and people's opinions. And that's part of what I had done in this moment in this apartment. And what this principle is about is really about developing a resilient mindset and learning how to hold our beliefs or our assumptions about life with open hands. It's just none of us has the ability to see life with 100% accuracy, right? And so what I was realizing in this moment was, by listening to the world and not stopping to think about my own instincts, my own interests, my own proclivities, which I have to be the expert on, right? By listening to the outside world and allowing the opinions of other people to trump my own interests and instincts, I ended up taking aggressive action down this path that was terrible for me. So my philosophy is not about never quit. Man, that's like, I don't believe in that at all. Like, sometimes you do need to quit. And here's the kicker. And this is what I learned. And hopefully you can see it here. But quitting took a lot of courage, especially when the rest of the herd felt like corporate America is the thing you need to be aspiring to. And for me to throw it away like that, it took so much courage to like stand my ground and decide, no, I'm not doing that. I know better. I know what's best for myself. I'm going to go this way. And a big part of me finding that confidence, remember y'all, like, at this time in my life, there's no Green Beret. There's just this timid, obese kid that finally lost all this weight. And then there's this kid who had always been, academically conscientious, who got an engineering degree. And what I didn't have the understanding of the gravity of those accomplishments until much, much later. So I didn't have the same kind of confidence. So it took a lot of courage to walk away from that job and to basically save myself. It took a lot of courage, but it was also like, it was the decision to walk away was also like, was also driven by fear as well, because I was afraid of what I might do to myself, where my health might go. And I wasn't willing to sacrifice. I had fought so hard for my health. I wasn't willing to just sacrifice my health for this good job that everybody else wanted. Look, if everybody else wanted that good job, then they can take their behinds to college and do the work to get an engineering degree, and then they can get a good job. But, a lot of people at that time didn't want to hear that kind of talk, right? They didn't want to hear, like, you could have made the same sacrifices I made and gotten an engineering degree. That stuff used to run through my mind, but again, I didn't have the confidence to say it at the time. But people know better than to come at me like that now. But anyway, folks, this is why you have to understand your story. And you got to think about those three origins, because sometimes, like, I had these unconscious beliefs about what success is and what a good job is. And I had adopted these beliefs from my environment. And because I hadn't taken time to stop and scrutinize those beliefs, here I am taking massive action in a direction that is totally antithetical to who I am as a person. And this, of course, this will destroy you. Of course I was suicidal. Of course I was depressed, right? Because I'm not acknowledging who I am as a person and allowing that and having the courage to present that to the world. And it was super disorienting, right? Like, I had done all the right things. Why am I being evicted from my apartment? I had done all the things that I was supposed to do. Oh, here's why. Because I'm running after all these faulty beliefs that don't have any facts behind them. So I'm beginning to separate fact from fiction and focus on the facts. What are the facts? I'm interested in physical and mental challenges. I'm into fitness. I want a job with purpose. I need to pay off debt, right? Like, what are also the facts? I lost 100 pounds. I've got a degree in engineering. I can clearly do hard things, right? These are all things these are all real data points. And by looking at the facts, this is how I'm going to begin to reorient and redirect myself moving forward. And we're going to talk about that in the next episode of the podcast, where we cover principle 3, maintain a vision. Look, y'all, if you are watching this on YouTube, make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel. You're listening on Spotify, make sure to follow the podcast, the Most Important Skill in Life podcast, and make sure to go over to travisdaigle.com. There you can check out my book, Adapt and Overcome, 3 Principles to Master the Most Important Skill in Life, Personal Ownership. And you can also subscribe to the blog. That's the blog articles that I write are where the podcast episodes come from, and they'll typically come out 2 to 3 months before the podcast episodes come out. So, yeah, man, go do all that, y'all. And I appreciate your support. And remember, I believe in you. Look, y'all, there are going to be disorienting times in life. Some of you, you had the belief that a significant other that you had was going to be faithful to you and be with you forever. And then one day you found out they were cheating. Some of you, you've been cheated on before, and now you've developed this narrative in your head that no one else is trustworthy. And this is what I mean by belief systems and things knocking us off course. Remember, the trauma of my past and being bullied and abused growing up made me very agreeable to people and made me seek the approval of people. And that approval seeking had me go down a road that destroyed me. And so what we have to be careful about is, look, we're always going to have holes in our story. And so we have to hold our beliefs with an open hand. Even as I updated my beliefs about who I was as a person during this time, I still had to maintain the understanding that I don't understand the whole world. I don't know what I don't know. And so I have to be careful about those things. I have to be careful. And to me, resilience, a lot of resilience is knowing that there's something that's wrong about the way you think about the world, and not feeling like the rug's been pulled out from under your feet when you come across the evidence that some of your beliefs may be totally wrong, right? And sometimes when we get traumatized by life and these things hit us from left field, it can be very hard to reorient ourselves. But this is where we have to take responsibility for our belief system. We have to be willing to look at the gaps and look at the facts and start with the facts and move forward. Remember, y'all, this is the Most Important Skill in Life podcast. I am your host, Travis Daigle. Until next time.